Hello, I'm a great fan of George Schrader, as I know all of you are as well. And it's wonderful to be with people today who remember him as fondly as I do, and especially nice that it's on his 90th birthday, what would have been his 90th birthday. We all know how much he meant to our part of the world. Hardly anything happened in those years that didn't have his hand in it. He was instrumental in Reunion and the Hyatt at one end of downtown on the Trinity Riverside, the Meyerson Symphony Center at the other end, and a lot in between and beyond. He was incredible in his effort and in his energy. And it's so good to know that they will be not only commemorated at the University of North Texas, but transmitted to other generations of leaders whom we need badly. They can't arrive soon enough, of course, in this and every city in America. It's a project worthy of George Schrader. He knew about it and was happy to hear about it, as we all are. And here to tell us more is Lisa Rowe, the Chancellor of the university.
Our friend, former Dallas City Manager George Schrader, who recently passed, will be greatly missed. As Dallas City Manager for most of the 1970s, Mr. Schrader helped shape Dallas into the world-class city that it is today. I am excited to announce that UNT will keep Mr. Schrader's legacy alive by establishing the George R. Schrader Professorship of Practice in Local Government through a new fundraising campaign. This impactful professorship will bring current city managers and other local government officials into our high-ranked Masters in Public Administration program to educate the future leaders of our nation's cities. Throughout his career, George Schrader was a mentor to others, including former UNT System Chancellor Lee Jackson, and this professorship will honor his achievements while providing tremendous benefit to our UNT students. Please consider helping us celebrate the life and legacy of George Schrader through this worthy program.
The Master of Public Administration program at UNT has a long history of educating and equipping graduates for successful careers in municipal government. It's one of our university's largest graduate programs, and it's ranked number 7 for local government management by U.S. News and World Report. Since 1962, our MPA program has provided students with the foundation they need for success, and it's developed the next generation of municipal leaders. Countless MPA program graduates provide visionary leadership to communities throughout our state and nation as they serve in the vital role of city manager, just as George Schrader did for the city of Dallas. Our alumni encourage progress and lead cities large and small. They're currently in Dallas, Plano, Allen, Prosper, Justin, Saginaw, Lake Dallas, Bernie, Kerrville, and Waxahachie, just to name a few. Through your support of the Schrader Professorship, you will inspire the next generation of civil servants while honoring George Schrader's legacy. Thank you.
When COVID-19 disrupted everything, we did what we do best. When we could no longer be together, we still found ways to stay close. When the number one goal is to help students achieve their dreams, we overcome any obstacle, bringing education and opportunity for 130 years with a resilient, caring, and creative spirit. The University of North Texas, where education never stops.
Well, thank you so much, Mary, for being a part of the announcement regarding the George R. Schrader Professor of Practice. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts today about George as we honor him and celebrate his life. So, Mary, I know you were a special friend to George. Can you tell us how you were connected or how you became friends?
Well, George Schrader was Uncle Eric's city manager, and Uncle Eric was one of my father's partners at TI's, Eric Johnson. And I knew George when I was like 15 years old, because he was always at Eric's side. And I hate to say how long ago that was, but it was a few years back. So George and I have been friends for a long time. And what he did for our city.
So Mary, what do you remember most about George's qualities and what made him effective at accomplishing so much during his tenure as Dallas city manager?
George was incredibly quiet about things he was getting done. He had an unassuming presence, and he could walk into Margaret McDermott's home, or he could walk into Joe Smith's home, and he'd be comfortable in either one. He was never impressed with himself or what he got done, but I think he had a fun time doing what he did.
Very well said, Mary. Very well said. How will you remember George and his legacy on now what would have been his 90th birthday here, February 16th?
His laugh, his smile, and his willingness to help all the time. He never asked anything of anybody, but people always asked him to do something. And I think Eric, when he was mayor, and that's the first Eric Johnson, he came in right after Kennedy was shot as mayor. And it was a hard time for Dallas. It was a difficult period. And I think he and George told each other that we need to do something to bring Dallas out of the very dark place it was in. And he did. He said, we need to become a new city. And the way to do that is, he said, every major city has a port and Dallas doesn't. So the way of the future is an airport. And he sent George out to buy farms between here and Fort Worth after having worked a deal with the Fort Worth mayor. And George went and he'd buy this farm and he'd buy that farm and he'd buy this farm. And before anybody really realized what this little unassuming man did, he put together 26,000 acres for DFW. I mean, it was probably, I guess the largest place would have been 3,000 acres, but most of them would have been 800, 600, something like that. So he was incredible that way.
Mary, you're a philanthropic and civic leader. How important is the role of city manager in looking into the future, advancing the prosperity of a community, and always being ready to help others?
It takes a certain personality. As I said, George did a lot of impressive things, but he was never impressed with himself. It takes people like that who will do things and not care about the glory about them.
Wow, I could not agree more. That was George for sure. He reminded me of that level 5 leader that Jim Collins writes about, a great manager and a leader, but also a person with deep humility and undeterred professional will to get things done. He certainly channeled his ego away from himself and into the larger goal of building a great city. Okay, Mary, now as we wrap up this conversation about George, is there anything else you would like to share about George and the effort to create a professor of practice in his honor at the University of North Texas?
I believe that George Schrader was city manager of Dallas with one of the greatest mayors we've ever had. As I said, he came in at a very difficult time for the city. But between Eric and George, they built DFW, they built an I.M. Pei exquisite city hall, and he built a public library because Eric knew how important reading was, and he knew that the seat of government was important. And we got the Meyerson during his tenure. We got the Dallas Museum of Fine Arts, which is now the Dallas Museum of Art. We got all these wonderful things that were built during George's tenure. I think George has been there for other city managers to talk to and to bounce off ideas. I do believe other city managers have a slightly different problem in the fact that we've got to maintain these beautiful buildings and we have to update them, and we've got to make sure that everything runs.
So Mary, I really appreciate your remarks about George as a mentor to others in the city management profession. He was that way all of the way up to his passing. George and I became friends during my time working for the city of Dallas. He was always there for me and so many of his colleagues. So to close, Mary, I just want you to know that I feel like George is with us. He's listening to your remarks with great joy, as he was so undoubtedly very fond of you. Thank you for being a part of this wonderful way to honor his legacy.
At Mr. Johnson's request, he assigned me to be the staff liaison for the development of the plans for DFW Airport. And it was there that I got to be very close friends, started being very close friends, lifelong friends with Mayor Johnson. Mayor Johnson, they decided that all of their deliberations had been private in executive session. They didn't create any records. So my first assignment was to write the minutes of the meetings. And Fort Worth said, well, if you're going to keep record, we're going to keep a record. And so they directed Howard McMahon to be their liaison and to write minutes. So two of us were writing the minutes, and Howard and I were well acquainted, and I said, Howard, there's no sense in both of us keeping the minutes. Why don't we alternate? You write them one time, submit them to me, and I'll edit them. Then when we're in agreement, we'll distribute them to both cities' representatives, and then I'll write them the next time, and you do the same. So we got done. The two staffs got done, which for decades couldn't get done by the politicians. We shared each other's, and later on we bought the land together.
Hello, my name is Jo Gedice, and I'm the Director of Libraries for the City of Dallas. I knew George Schrader for just over 7 years. We first met during fundraising planning for the renovation of the 6th and 7th floors of the Central Library. Our mutual friend, Don Stone, invited us both to lunch. That was the beginning of many dining dates. George and I bonded during that first meal over our disagreement of where the broadside copy of the Declaration of Independence should be displayed. It is on permanent display here at the Central Library on the 7th floor. George thought it should be kept at City Hall. By the end of lunch, he acquiesced and even agreed to join me on a radio interview for KERA about the Declaration near July 4th. The following month, I called to ask his opinion during my budget preparations, and he invited me to breakfast. That became a monthly date that lasted over 6 years. I got to know George, the city manager, and George, the parental figure. We were often mistaken as father and daughter, which thrilled me as I had lost my dad more than 20 years ago. We talked about everything from city budgets to dating for me, to family and work, daily work challenges. He never told me the same story twice. Even during the past year, we spoke on the phone and emailed frequently when we could no longer meet for breakfast. He was a wise and humorous man, which some people didn't get to see, the humor side of him. But he also taught me true time management. The story he told was when he was aggravated at City Hall because people were taking so long to express themselves during visits that he stole the egg timer out of his wife's kitchen and began to turn that timer over when people came to visit. Some of George's timers are on the shelf behind me. My favorite is the one that he personally gifted to me, which his daughter brought back to him from the New York Public Library. We together, when he decided to move out of his home and into traditions, spent 3 days packing up his home office and going through all of his memorabilia from his time as city manager, stopping to tell me tales, and I recorded every story of every award that we now have housed in the City Dallas archives here at the library. George Schrader served as Dallas City Manager from 1972 to 1981 and was instrumental in creating or expanding some of the most important projects in the city's history. During his tenure, Dallas City Hall was constructed. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was developed. The Dallas Arboretum and Botanical Gardens were created. The Dallas Arts District was established. He also made the first public-private partnership in the U.S. happen with Reunion Station. Without George, the Dallas Public Library would not be the institution it is today. He supported then Director Lillian Bradshaw, the first woman director of a City of Dallas department, when she said she needed a new, larger, more modern central library in the late 70s. And he continued to support the library through many expansions and renovations. George was the second longest serving city manager of Dallas, and at the time of his retirement, he was managing the 7th largest city in the U.S. and the largest U.S. city that was governed by a council-manager form of government. He was a pioneer for modern city management and always a champion for the council-manager form of government. George was widely regarded as the man who built Dallas during its golden era. And as you can see, it was for good reason. It was an honor knowing George, and his impact on Dallas leaves a legacy that lives on every day.
I'm Mary Soom, worked for the City of Dallas for my whole career. And my first contact with Mr. Schrader was as the big boss when I graduated from UNT with an MLS and came to work for the Dallas Public Library. I knew Mr. Schrader, that was his last 3 years as city manager there, and I knew and admired him from a distance at that point in time. And really, my vision didn't extend as far as my entire career, so I didn't know that we were going to become close and that I was going to share a profession that he was outstanding in. Every month or so, we'd go out to breakfast and he would listen. And yes, he would make suggestions, but he mainly listened. And it was hugely helpful because you knew when he was listening that he had had these similar experiences, and had a great admiration for the things he accomplished in his time at the city. He started the work on the Arts District, the planning for it, and that project was a 35-year project. And now you look at it now, and I don't think people even go back and go, mercy, that took a long time, because they enjoyed it and appreciate it so much. And that's where he started, and I was working on it during my time period too, and it was very rewarding. But he had plowed the field before I came. Another one was, of course, Reunion Arena and the Hyatt, and that development, the settlement and development of that whole corner of downtown was something on George's shoulders when he was very, very young, and he and John Scoville worked on that. That's made a huge difference in our city as, iconic ball above Hyatt Hotel. Additionally, DFW Airport, some of the work that we did on that as I was working was on a tax sharing arrangement, but that is a project that George saw the need for and the benefit for, and not only that turns out to be a national benefit because that's such a centrally located international airport. So George's vision was pretty expansive. I've always held Mr. Schrader in great admiration. This ability to balance his job, his commitment to his professional organizations, to his community and his family, I really thought was very special. And it's not a skill set that all of us have, and George had it.
My name is Ricky Childers. I'm the former city manager of Lancaster and Longview, Texas, and had a career of 36 years in local government. I first met George in 1979 at my first Texas City Managers Conference in Corpus Christi. I didn't realize this was the city manager of Dallas I was talking with. And I was a young guy. I was working for the city of Lubbock, but in grad school in my late 20s. And he treated me like one of his peers. So I was very impressed with him. I think he was, at that time, or soon after, became president of the International City Managers Association. We worked together back in 2005 or 6 when the city of Dallas had a referendum to go to a strong mayor form of government. And he was chair of the Citizens Committee to oppose it. And I was president of the Texas City Management Association at that time. And we worked real closely together and collaborated on how to go about maintaining the council manager plan in Dallas. And what George needed was money because of advertising and things of that sort. And I ran into some issues on the use of we had a large reserve that we could donate to Dallas, but George and I came up with a solution was to they said, well, you can't donate it to a political action committee because it's public money that the dues were paid by members who were paid by cities. And so what we did, we came up with the idea to fund the money that we donated to the International City Managers Association, and they in turn funded George and his people to make sure we got the marketing out to help us win. And we won the election, by the way. Dallas still has a city manager. And it was one of my proud moments and have an opportunity to work and to help maintain the council manager form of government in Dallas. One of my fondest memories of him is it's kind of weird because I was a young person in my second year in local government in 1976 and applied for a position with the city of Dallas. This is before I met George in person. And I received this letter from him, which I valued, saying, sorry, the position was not filled in the budget, and so therefore we have to do away with the position and not have it. And so we appreciate you applying and all that. And that meant a lot to me as a young person in my early 20s to get a letter from the city manager of Dallas telling me that. And I told him that when I first met him in '79, reminded him of that. He laughed, but he was a very, very special guy. We had a mutual respect for each other. And I can remember when he, in his latter years, each year at our conference, City Managers Conference, Texas Conference, we have all the past presidents that come to a dinner. And we were so honored when George and his wife came one year. I think it was I can't remember where it was. I think it was Corpus Christi or Galveston. And he came to the dinner, and of course we had to tell what year we were presidents. And George, I think he was president probably in the early 70s, something like that. He was by far, he served as far as time, because I was 2005, he was the oldest person there. But we all enjoyed him and we all respected him. He's George, a type guy that you just respected him. He was not pompous, because at the time that he was city manager of Dallas, city managers rarely interacted with employees or underlings. And they were more of the country club type. And working with the councils was a lot different then. They were mostly business people, successful business people. And the city manager wouldn't really, have much to do with the staff. But George, I never worked for him, but when he was with us, like I said, back in '79 in Corpus Christi, it's like he was one of us. It made us feel comfortable. It made us feel welcome.
I asked him, do you have, what's your discrimination policy? And they said, we don't have any. We don't, so far as we know, we have no minorities in Mesquite at all. We don't have we don't have a black or a Hispanic in town. And I said, you have a swimming pool? I said, yes. I said, if a black person came in and wanted to swim in the pool, would you let them? And they said, no. We have standing instructions to the swimming pool. close the pool if somebody drives up. And I said, well, I can't accept a job like that. I'm conscientiously can't discriminate. And they said, kind of huddled, and they said, well, maybe we don't need to do that anymore. And I said, well, I couldn't do it. And I know that that's within your authority to do that. I went home. A friend of mine complimented me and I said, why? And they said, he said, well, you're the new city manager of Mesquite. And I said, no, I'm not. I haven't accepted it. They actually asked me to accept it there. So we accept your proposal. I didn't make them a proposal. And I said, well, I didn't say that. It's on the front page of the paper today. And I said, well, what do I do now?
George was one of the first city managers of a large city to hire an African American as an assistant, and Levi Davis. When I started, Levi was in the city manager's office in Dallas. And we had an African American assistant in Fort Worth also at that time, Vernell Stearns. But there were a lot of cities who wouldn't take the risk to do so back in the mid-'70s when I started out in the business. So I appreciate George for being a visionary and looking toward the future and willing to. I know he faced some criticism for hiring an African American in office to work in the city manager's office at that time. So I really appreciate him being forward thinking.
My fondest memory of George was when I, along with George and A.C. Gonzalez, were graciously hosted by Mary McDermott Cook for lunch at her home to formally ask George if he would allow us to honor him with a professor of practice at UNT. It was a perfect setting with an eagle's nest view of the entire Dallas skyline. I asked him if he would lend his name to the professorship, and he just lit up with a big smile that only George can do, and began to ask a lot of questions, a lot of details about the role of the position because he wanted to know more about this. He was so very excited about the idea of a former city manager embedded in the UNT MPA program to mentor and teach. And he began to offer suggestions on how he might help this happen. He then humbly accepted and mentioned what an incredible honor it would be to be associated in such a way with the UNT MPA program.
George is kind of, on a pedestal in my world. So, he's always the big boss in my mind, even though he was always very kind to me and very helpful to me all the time. But he was a very special man all the way around.
I've realized that almost everyone I talked with who, of my age or older, who knew him, they all agree he was a great, great city manager. He was the perfect city manager, I'd say, from someone like myself looking at him. He was professional, polished, carried himself well, did all the things right, and made us all proud to be in local government and city manager.
The thing I miss is that we'd always have pancakes. It was his favorite food, and it's one of my top 3 anyway. At the end of the meal, especially when he was walking with a cane, I'd help him put his coat on and get his stuff together. And then he'd grab my face and say, "I love you."
I have heard it said that democracy is a practice, not a state of being. And that, of course, is true of government as well. So how important that we will have created at the University of North Texas the George R. Schrader Professorship of Practice in Local Government. And I think as a result of this program in the Masters of Public Administration at UNT, we will have even more doing the same.